First Lady Melania Trump issued a rare public statement yesterday denying that she had a close relationship with convicted child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today. I never been friends with Epstein. Donald and I were invited to the same parties as Epstein from time to time, since overlapping in social circles is common in New York City and Palm Beach. To be clear, I never had a relationship with Epstein or his accomplice, Maxwell.
In a brief phone call yesterday after her remarks, President Trump told me he didn't know about the substance of the First Lady's statement ahead of time, adding that she didn't know Epstein. The timing for her remarks was unclear, as the First Lady has not been accused of any wrongdoing in relation to Epstein or his accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell. The First Lady addressed a 2002 email exchange with Maxwell that was included in the Epstein files, in which she praised a magazine story about Epstein, complimented Maxwell's photo, and signed off with the email, quote, "Love, Melania." The First Lady said that her email, quote, "cannot be categorized as anything more than casual correspondence." She then called on Congress to facilitate a public hearing for Epstein survivors, despite her husband repeatedly decrying the push for transparency as a, quote, Democrat hoax, and fighting the release of the files.
Now is the time for Congress to act. Epstein was not alone. I call on Congress to provide the women who have been victimized by Epstein with a public hearing specifically centered around the survivors. Give these victims their opportunity to testify under oath in front of Congress with the power of sworn testimony.
Joining us now is former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Dave Ehrenberg, and co-founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader. She's a contributor to the Notice Perspectives column. Dave, I want to start with you, as you are a Palm Beach native. Something that caught my eye in her statement was also part of her explanation of why she had, quote, never been friends with Epstein, despite, as we all just saw, countless pictures with him on the social circuit. She said, "Donald and I were invited to the same parties as Epstein from time to time, since overlapping in social circles is common in New York City and Palm Beach." Can you break down for us and provide sort of a fact check on how these social circles actually work in a place like Palm Beach?
Jackie, good to be with you. I'm not part of those social circles, but there are pictures of Melania, as you're showing them, with Donald Trump and Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And the person who ties Melania to Jeffrey Epstein directly is journalist Michael Wolff. And I think what she did yesterday was to try to get ahead of a story, because she and Michael Wolff are involved in litigation. And Michael Wolff, apparently, according to the Daily Beast, who she name-checked in the press conference, has these recordings. And the recordings have Jeffrey Epstein's voice on them, saying that the first time that Melania and Donald Trump had sex was on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. And I think this press conference is a way to get ahead of it. I think it's less about the social circles as about those recordings that she worries will come out.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we have not independently verified any of that reporting, and we still have not been able to sort of figure out if the First Lady was trying to preempt a negative story that might be in the pipeline, or if it's something that's already out there. But, Lauren, I want to ask you about some of the response that we've already seen now to Melania Trump's statement. The survivors are basically criticizing her for her comments and said that she's shifting the blame from elected officials, from people like Pam Bondi, who's still refusing to come testify before Congress under a subpoena about why the whole Epstein tranche of documents has yet to be released, and deflecting it back onto the victims, the survivors, people who have already spent so much time in the limelight, repeating for months and years now their stories over and over again. What's your take on Melania Trump's push for a public hearing featuring the survivors?
So I spoke to one of the survivors last night, and I will tell you that beyond the page of what's in that letter, which essentially says, calling on us to testify is exactly backwards. Already the victims since, the mid-90s have been asking to be heard and taken seriously. Asking them to testify in Congress is a completely perverse way of shifting responsibility back to them. And what one of the survivors told me last night is just it continues to re-traumatize them and heaps more stress on an already crushing load of stress and anxiety that these women have been carrying for decades. The bigger issue with the press conference yesterday is not what she said. It's everything that she did not say. She called on Congress to haul the victims in front of them. She did not herself offer to testify under oath, which Hillary Clinton did. She did not call on the Justice Department to release the rest of the files. She did not call on her husband to testify under oath. I mean, the list of what is missing from this is as long as what is there. And it's just, it's incredibly poorly executed. If she's trying to deflect blame from herself, she, in the process, made things worse for the victims and missed endless opportunities to, really call for real accountability.
Dave, talking about going before Congress, Pam Bondi was to go before Congress, and now has said she will not appear before Congress dealing with this investigation on Epstein. How does that play out in your mind? What impact and what does it say to you that could be the possible reasons that Bondi resists going before Congress?
Rev, Congress issued a subpoena to Attorney General Pam Bondi as her role as Attorney General. So she's saying that she's no longer Attorney General, so she doesn't have to comply. And James Comer, the chair of the committee, is on her side on that. So they could try to issue a subpoena to her in her personal capacity. But what is the consequence if she does not comply? Well, she could be held in contempt of Congress, which will then be referred to the Department of Justice for potential prosecution. First, it has to pass through the House, and then DOJ is going to have to prosecute Pam Bondi, and that's not going to happen. There's the internal, inherent contempt power of Congress, but Congress hasn't used that for 100 years, so that power has withered on the vine. They don't have a jail inside the House. So really, there's very little consequence. But, if you really want to get to the bottom of what's going on with the Epstein files, you would subpoena Todd Blanche. He's the acting attorney general. He's the one who's been running point for the Trump administration on this. He's the one who interviewed Ghislaine Maxwell for 9 hours. He's the one, apparently, who okayed the transfer of Ghislaine Maxwell to a minimum security facility. That's the one you'd want to drag before the House Oversight Committee.
And he was the former personal attorney to President Trump.
Correct. Right. He's very loyal to Trump to this day. And if this also goes to the fact that if Pam Bondi's firing was really about Epstein, why would you replace her with Todd Blanche, who's been running point on Epstein? The reason why Pam Bondi was fired was because Donald Trump expected his enemies to land up in a jail cell.
Former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Dave Ehrenberg, thanks for joining us this morning. Lauren Leader, you are sticking with us.